Hi there. Today we're going to be looking at installing Couchbase NoSQL Database as a catalog item in VMware's Application Director, and then from there, as a developer, how to go about using the functionality in both tools to make life a little bit easier for us. So the first thing we're going to need is obviously an instance of Application Director from VMware. Once that's installed, what we can actually do is go to VMware's Solutions Exchange and search for the Couchbase catalog item. Now we're looking at the page here for it right now, and as you can see there's some documentation for what the solution is, some technical specifications, support resources, as well as additional resources for learning more about Couchbase. So to get started, what we're actually going to do is we are going to click on the try link, and that brings us to a GitHub repository. And the GitHub repository essentially holds instructions for how to go about creating Couchbase Server as a service in Application Director. Now there's two scripts in here, a number of screenshots, and a README, and it's fairly simple to install. Now after reading through this README, what we're going to do is follow the step-by-step instructions to go about creating it as a catalog item first in VMware's AppDirector. So once we've gone and read the README in the GitHub repository for AppDirector and Couchbase, what we're going to do is go into our Application Director instance and create a catalog item for Couchbase. So from here, what I do is I click on Manage Catalog Items, and we can see here the list of available services that are in this Application Director instance. Now these are all components that I can go and install and run and deploy as a developer or as a user of Application Director. So to start off with, we're going to click the plus sign to create a new service. And in this case, we're going to call it Couchbase. We're going to give it a service version. And today we're going to be installing Couchbase 1.8.1. We're going to give it a tag for database servers, and as well as the supported operating systems. Now in this case, the initial version of the Couchbase AppDirector script supports mainly Red Hat or CentOS-based 64-bit platforms. So we're simply going to select the 64-bit CentOSs that are available in this system. And then we move on to properties. Now properties in Application Director are parameters that are passed down from the environment to the deployed VMs as well as the application services. So we have a number of them that are outlined in the GitHub repository, and we're simply going to start creating them. Alright, so we've gone and created all our parameters or properties that we need in the App Director and Couchbase integration. And to go over a couple of these really quick, the important ones at least, we have a couple of Couchbase specific ones. In this case we use buckets as a logical partition for the database itself. And in this instance we're just creating a default bucket. The bucket type will be Couchbase. The replica count will be 1. We have some App Director specific parameters like cluster IPs, which is an array that's going to hold the IPs of all the server nodes in the Couchbase cluster. And we have one called node array index, which is going to hold essentially the deployment number of the VM itself. And that's used later on in the scripts for clustering purposes. We also have some that are specific to the environment that we're deploying in. In this case, the Couchbase port. We're going to use 8080 instead of the default 8091, simply because of some firewall restrictions. And we also have a SSH password as well as a console password for administrative access as well as access to the Couchbase system. Lastly, we also set the SSH port to a non-default port, port 80, again because of firewall restrictions. So lastly, for this service, what we're going to do is set up the actions. And the actions are essentially scripts that are run at different lifecycle stages of VM deployment. And to get the scripts, I can actually go back to the GitHub repository. And access them from here. So the first one we have is the install script. I can click on it and select the entire script. And paste it into the script action section in AppDirector. Click OK to save it. Next, the configure script. And again, we'll simply paste it into the AppDirector user interface. So these two scripts take care of all the work that's necessary for actually installing Couchbase and configuring it automatically. Once I click OK, I now have a Couchbase service version 1.8.1 that I can deploy in my environment as a user. So now let's go look at application deployment in terms of how I'd actually go about using the two tools to deploy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sample application, and I'm going to call this online game, and we're going to give it a version 1.0. Click OK. And the application director interface allows me to have a WYSIWYG editor for creating a blueprint of how I want my environment to look and how I want it to be configured. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up some Couchbase instances. So I'm going to select the CentOS 64-bit, drag it over here, and select Couchbase 1.8.1, and drag it over here. Now from here, there's a couple things I need to do to configure this so that it can run properly. The first thing I do is I click on this plus button to convert this to a cluster of nodes as opposed to just one. Now when I do that, the cluster tab gives me an option for cluster size. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to set up 5 nodes of Couchbase to run. And we're also going to edit some of the default properties before we go about deploying this in our environment. So the specific properties that we're going to look at are cluster IPs. I select it to edit the value. And we are going to bind this to another property in the blueprint. And this is going to be something that's going to be provided automatically by Application Director when we go and deploy. And we're going to configure this to point to all the CentOS 64-bit IPs, essentially all the IPs of the nodes that are going to be in the cluster. Click Save. Next, we're going to look at node array index. And again, we're going to bind this to a slightly different value, a deployment value. And we're going to assign it to self node array index. And click Save. Now I have Couchbase configured so that I can properly deploy it in the environment. And in this case, I might want to add some other components. If I want to add a 64-bit or 32-bit CentOS VM, we're going to put vFabric TC server onto it and create a relation between the two. And in this case, what I'm going to do is say that the TC server application server, the application that's going to be run on it is connecting to Couchbase. Now to go ahead and deploy this and test and make sure that it actually works, what I can do from here is click on the deploy button, give it a new deployment name, and click on map details, which is going to give me some additional information about the environment for the cloud templates that we're installing, as well as the networks that this is configured for. Click Next. Confirm that I have configured all the properties for the Couchbase template properly. If I want, I can also go and configure the vFabric TC server properties as well. And in this case, everything looks good. Two most important things being the cluster IP set to the blueprint value that's going to be configured at deployment time, as well as node array index, which is also going to be configured at deployment time. Click Next again. And I can look at the execution plan of what's going to be done. So in this case, I see that Couchbase is going to be installed in a cluster of 5. And I can actually click on this expand button to see all the nodes and how they're going to be configured and their relation to the end TC server instance. Click Next, and I'm ready to either save this as an application that another user in the environment can use and access a little later on, or I can deploy it right now, and that's what we're going to do. So now our deployment's been queued. If we click reload, we can actually watch the status of this of application director, creating the instances and running them through their configuration. Now we're back to our AppDirector instance, and we can see that it has deployed successfully. I can go to the execution plan and see that everything was wired up, the start and stop times, how long it took to run each phase of the lifecycle steps for the execution plan to install and configure Couchbase, as well as TC server. So from here I can do a couple different things. I can go to the VM console if I want to get direct access to the VMs, and I can also go to the IP addresses that are available for all of these VMs. So let's go to one of the IP addresses, any one is fine, for the Couchbase console. And we're going to pick this first one. So from a web browser, I can go to the IP of that VM, port 8080, and log in with the administrator username, as well as the password that I had set as a deployment property, Couchbase123. From here, we're looking at an overview section of the cluster itself. I can see the cluster is made up of 5 nodes, that it has around 7.75 gigs of memory allocated to it, and how much disk and what kind of operations are going on. From the monitoring section, I can see that all the nodes are up and available. They're all healthy. They're all listing on port 8080, how much RAM and CPU they're using, and exactly how many active items and replica items. If I go to the data buckets page, I can see the stats for the default bucket that was created. And as you can see in this cluster, our test application is not really doing anything. So let's go and add some load to it. So what I can do from here is we will use one of the default utilities in Couchbase to go and add some load to the cluster itself. So I'm going to SSH in using the Couchbase user account that was created on the machine to port 80. Now there is a default utility located in opt Couchbase bin called memcache test. And this will let us apply some load to the cluster. So I am going to simply tell it to go to the local host, use 4 threads, and an item count of 10,000. A connection pool of 4, and tell it to loop this operation 10 times and fire it off. Yeah, over to Couchbase. In terms of rough operations per second, both creates, updates, and gets. And you can see here that it instantly pretty much filled up 10,000 items. And now it's simply going through a loop, requesting those items, getting them, updating them. And from here we can use and leverage some of the performance that Couchbase has to service these requests very quickly. So that's it for today's walkthrough. I hope it was a useful use of your time to see how Couchbase and Application Director can be used to provide a NoSQL solution in your internal cloud environments through AppDirector. Thanks.